Hi, this is David Gill with another edition of Vert Athlete. Today we have Patrick Lillis, who runs our analytics department. And of course, we're joined by Ed, associate head coach over at Xavier. And we've got Jake, who heads their strength conditioning for volleyball. Thanks for jumping on, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
No, our pleasure. So we've been doing a number of these calls, conversations, going through best practices with technology. And a lot of it is also talking about, what coaches are doing right now, not just with technology, but also just to prepare for a return to play whenever we're able to do that. And so we're really excited now to go through, learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing as a staff, what you're planning to do. And again, we're very thankful. I think throughout this whole thing, it's been awesome how much everyone's been sharing, because everyone's basically on the even playing field at this point. So to kind of get this started off, can you give me some insights, Ed and Jake, in terms of the conversations you're having regarding not, keeping everything clean? I know that's a big part of it, but just from the physical development perspective, bringing these athletes back from a deconditioned state.
Well, let me start this off first by thank you for having us. I do hope that everyone's staying safe and healthy through this time. And you brought up a great point, David, as far as sharing information. We actually had a discussion pertaining to this exact topic through the weeks of this situation, and we actually had a most recent conversation like last week. So as far as going into a conversation like this, first you've got to make sure that the communication is clear and direct with your athletes, as far as what is going on, what we have planned. Just because I think presenting something like this automatically to them, and there leaves up a lot of questions and doubts, honestly, to a lot of the athletes. So going into it's basically prepping yourself as a coaching staff going into your meetings or your presentation to the team and saying, hey, because there's gonna be questions coming from all different angles of what angle, from what direction there is, of what's coming up ahead of them. So I think this is a great opportunity to be ahead of that curve.
Yeah, and to put Jake on the spot, because obviously, strength coaches are sending out programming, but obviously there's no mandate, can't monitor it. From the strength conditioning perspective, what is the kind of general plan when they step back into your care?
So for what we're doing right now is kind of preparing us for that. So right now we're working on general physical preparation, so commonly GPP, especially with the short spring, and the basically turns into a longer summer. We basically have a larger window of general preparatory work that we can do that's going to help build us into a smoother transition into our specific preparatory work. That will lead us up into the season, the competition phase. And right now, we could play a million what ifs of like, when are people going to return? When's the first competition? And a lot of these things we don't know. So right now, our most logical approach is just to plan as if things are going to continue to, or if things will pick up the way they used to be. So we'll get back to campus when we normally do. We'll play when we normally do. And it's not like the season's going to start any sooner, right? Only either at the normal time or beyond. So we're going to plan for the earliest play date or competition date. So with that being said, we're really working back of what the demand would be like when the kids return back to campus, which is usually 2.5 weeks before the first competition. So, we met as a staff and looked at, what does that camp look like? How many hours a day will they be practicing? How many hours a week will they be practicing? What do those practices look like? And then from there, we really discussed working backwards from that. So it could be as simple as how many hours a week and how many hours a week are we looking to train? And then at some point, like, our athletes need to be within, 10 to 20% of that hourly work rate or weekly work rate before they get into camp, right? They can't be training 5 days a week for 1 hour a day, or, 5 days a week for a half hour. And then they get to camp and they're asked to do, 3 hours a day. That's a huge workload increase. And from there, we know that anytime you have these huge dramatic increase or changes in workload, soft tissue injuries are higher at risk, other injuries, overuse, things like that. So really, we talked about as a staff of seeing what that looks like and then working backwards from there.
Yeah, that's been a topic of a number of conversations we've been having, as well as webinars, just kind of breaking it down into simple terms. We know that one of the best ways of minimizing acute injury is something as simple as having kind of a standardized neuromuscular training warm-up, getting the athletes that movement prep going. But when it comes to those chronic issues, those patellar tendinopathies, that lower back, hip pain,
shoulder from excessive swinging.
Exactly.
This is
The majority of it surrounds workload capacity development.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a fear. And actually, on that topic, Pat, if you could share the screen for presentation B and go to the fall progressions.
on it.
What we've been doing is we've been going through here our vert team and looking at, all right, because a lot of programs, like you said, you're kind of working backwards. Go up one from this page.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right here. Is trying to figure out like different progressions. And then Jake, I know you're going to go into a little more detail of what you guys are kind of planning to do. But it's just a good time to talk about
Right.
this. This is kind of your average Division I team periodization, right? Season starts off, you've got your 2-a-days, you have a lot of jumps, and then it tends to taper off throughout the year. What we anticipate, and we know a lot of coaches have discussed, and again, a lot of this depends on, when are you able to get back to practice, almost a flipping of this sequence, right? Because
Correct, like a reverse periodization
exactly.
model.
Taking more time to develop the athlete's physical capacity, so you don't have as much of a potential imbalance between that muscle and tendon. But yeah, so to your point, I think this is, it's neat to be able to, that's why we're sending this to everybody, just so that people can kind of see, here's what it typically is, and here's what you can kind of gauge against as you move forward. And I guess with that, you'd mentioned earlier how you guys are kind of planning on looking at some of last year's data.
Yeah. And I think for us, and hopefully what sets us apart, is utilizing you guys, and almost, that metric in itself is great, but it doesn't tell the full story. And, my goal has always been to get down to the nuances and figure out what those numbers actually mean, and how do we train for them, how do we prepare for them, how do we recover from them. So getting with you guys, tearing the data apart, and looking at what actually is going to have the biggest impact on performance. And so for us, we have specific numbers that we kind of looked at, or want to look at, and discuss as a staff on, what's the best way to build up for those.
Yeah, because in the end, if we know what we're preparing the athletes for, right, then we can figure out with the time given how we can best progress those jump loads to get them there. So yeah, that's exactly it, right? Your average 4-set match, I think a middle's about 104 jumps.
Yep.
Right.
And then
so and again, you can get down to the nuance of that. So like, the rotations and who, what percentage of those jumps are allocated to who. If you have, key starters, starters, backups, people that don't play a lot, how does that work from an individualization standpoint? And I think, again, that's the key on what separates, coaching staffs, is being able to dissect that data and apply it in a useful and practical manner. And like this stuff is great, even from a kind of an elementary view of just looking at it of this, seeing 105 jumps per match, what does that look like per set? Right. And then we have those numbers, obviously. So now you can kind of expect like, okay, so we need to at least average at some point those those athletes need to have that capacity to jump that total amount for a game. And then what does that look like? What's the average amount per set? And then you see these numbers. So you can kind of start working backwards and build your capacity model based around these metrics.
Now, from the beginning, as you're starting to look into practice design, Ed, are you kind of saying, let's have all of our middles start at the same point, all of our outsides start at the same point? Like when do you start to individualize just because this year is a little bit different?
It is completely different. I mean, if you're talking about BC before COVID times, you'd like to think we would have the kids come in through the summer, which added some depth to it. Right now, with that all in question of when they can get on campus, you really got to be pretty diverse with it, because there's some kids may be coming off an injury, or who knows what it is, and hopefully this time has given them time to recoup and heal. But I also think mentally you got to know what kind of kid has those buttons to be able to push those numbers. I would like to say everything's equal. A lot of kids sometimes don't have the resources that other kids have, and we've been helping our kids be creative with keeping in line, whether putting books in a backpack and using that to ruck around with, or to do squats with. That to me is a great way to be creative, but they know it's different from working out at home as compared to working out in Jake's wonderful, torture chamber. So
I think to piggyback off what Ed was saying, like if we're going to apply like an objective measure to it, obviously you can't just say last year's data doesn't tell you everything, right? Like if you had a senior that was a key starter that graduates and she's a middle blocker, and her jumps are now gone, that's going to be allocated to someone who may have not gotten those jumps. So you can't necessarily just go off last year's data like, oh well, that middle got 80 jumps, so this person, well, maybe how they're being used, they're not going to get that because they don't have that experience in playing time. But I think what you can look at is over the course of a year or 2 years, and that's where you get more data. It's like, what's the average, what's the maximum demand, what's the average demand of a middle in our system? And then that's when it comes down to the philosophical views and the strategy that the team uses. And like it's no difference than a pro style offense versus a spread offense. Yeah, there's the average that everyone's doing, but then you tailor it to the philosophical view of your team, and now you kind of have at least a buffer range of like, on a high experience, high usage middle, this is what it looks like. On average, this is what it looks like, and then on the low end, this is what a lesser used middle looks like. And then I think you just start buffering between the high and low end of those ranges, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, as you'd mentioned, to be blunt, you guys are a bit of an advantage. We've got a couple years of very solid data that we're working on and we're looking at. But as any coaches that are eventually going to be watching this video, they've probably been receiving reports we've been sending out, because what we're trying to do also at this time is we recognize budgets are virtually all frozen. We don't know what's going to happen, and yet more and more people are asking us, reaching out to us, just saying, what are some insights for what we can do to return to play? So we are also ourselves putting together different kind of what we're calling essential packages to make it really easy. We're going to be releasing those soon. But to your point, Jake, is you have to start somewhere, right? And so one of the things we're looking at and we're recommending to some programs, because some programs, they don't have an objective measure. Some programs have one or two sensors, like a full broad system. So we're saying, look, if you can at least, because most programs are going to be more so than ever before, training middles to start almost all the same and outsides to start almost all the same, having one outside and one middle monitored essentially will allow you to grow that kind of team load periodization on the court,
right?
And allow you to kind of switch it to get landings? Because that's going to be the big fear, that eccentric load, that stop that they've not been able to develop, or you don't know if they've been able to work on it at home.
Right. And, for us, that's part of our return to competition and like the way we program and periodize, that eccentric loading building up to that, right? They can't just show up on campus and then expect to do 3 hours a day for 2.5 weeks of eccentric loading. So like, again, that's why it was a priority to emphasize, like, what are we doing? I know camp seems like a long way for a lot of people, but again, you have to build up to something, right? And if hopefully it's the competition itself, but for some, there's a much higher demand in preseason than there is during an average week of practice. And it can be a whole nother topic, but, so in theory, you got to prep them for what's going to be the hardest, most demanding thing they're going to be. And unfortunately, that's camp. And that's unfortunately when we see a lot of injuries. So, but to your point, like when you talk about essential packages, like honestly, the sheet you have that you just showed us of league averages, or of the data that you guys have got from everybody, I think that is the base essential package, right? Monitors aside, that's worth something. And to me, it's no different than looking at an NFL or basketball and saying how many possessions are there in a game, right? Like if you have no clue what that is, how do you work backwards from the total time, right? Like if you don't know how many landings your athletes are doing, well, that's not necessarily available on a stat sheet. I've picked Ed's brain for 3 years, more specifically over the last 2 weeks, going through the stat sheet on what physical metrics we can get.
Ton of data, let me tell you.
And, I'm still learning the game of volleyball, and just dissecting the stat sheet, there's only so much you can derive from a volleyball stat sheet. That doesn't tell the full picture. That's not the same in every other sport, right? Like you can look at possessions in offense and defense and be like, okay, well, we know on the average NFL offense gets X amount, 75 possessions. Well,
let me tell you how fun that was to teach him the correlation of that football premise to volleyball.
A possession in volleyball, you don't, that doesn't necessarily say how many jumps that person's getting, right? Where you guys have that information. And that's why I think it's such a useful tool. Vert aside, it's the numbers and the metric to me that mean.
It's the data. Yeah,
it's the data. So I recommend anyone who doesn't have vert at least reach out to you guys and
thanks,
for the data. At least because that's a place to start, right? Yeah. Like if you don't know, like I would, it honestly would be a disservice to your
look at this
to not know that.
I'm just saying,
I think we're just trying to go for two medals with that plug right there.
Well, look, let's and Pat, if you can screen share again. All in all seriousness, the reason that Ed has the medal he was awarded at last AVCA, we don't give those out lightly. Is we, and I know you, seriously though, we don't, because the reason is, certain programs, again, we work with hundreds and hundreds of programs, certain programs, to be blunt, do a more thorough job of using the data or use it in a more actionable format. So this is something that I know, Ed, we talked about on the AVCA webinar we did weeks ago, months ago, who knows, sometime in the past. But yeah, this for us, as Pat can attest, we thought it was such a neat story where, and Ed, I'll kind of let you go through it, but yeah, this was just a freshman, and this is a look at landings, elevated landings when you guys started up.
Yeah, so when you're looking at this data, and the way you're presented to the kids, like we didn't want to overload them with numbers. We definitely wanted to let them know their jump counts, because that's the first thing that they look at when they come to the board. But what helped us was how the numbers were trending, and how the data was collected, and what actually, between Jake and our athletic trainer Megan, things were flagged as far as elevated landings, number of jump counts, which kind of had to hold the coaches on a leash to basically, we've got to control this. because we know that we don't want to just use it all in one practice or in 1 week. There's a preparation period for a match for that weekend, even in preseason. So gathering these type of numbers, it really helped us kind of plan practice as much as we were ready to go as coaches, and we wanted to continue to build on those numbers. The numbers kind of slapped us in the face and said, hey, you got to slow it down or you're going to lose the kid.
Yeah, and to clarify for those looking at this who might not be familiar, the what you're looking at, because eventually this just becomes sort of second nature when you look at it day in and day out. But these are percentage of elevated landings, so we can essentially break it into low, medium, high, and alert landings. Anything in the high or alert range, that means the athlete's landing very, very stiffly, and not like your good athletic stiffness. They're not absorbing that force at all. They're jackhammering the ground. So what you're looking at there was an outside who, that's how much higher percentage she was than the rest of the team. And sure enough, she did have some, lower extremity challenges. It probably is a big result of this. But yeah, we just thought that was, for us, we work so hard on developing these things and making it as actionable as possible. So we love it when coaches are able to take this and again, like we've always talked about, Jake and I talk about it all the time, it's merely a guide. But it can be an unbelievably powerful one. So yeah, that's what you guys freaking earn that medal.
Well, don't get me wrong. There was days when I saw jump counts and I was like, we're going higher than usual, people. We got to understand what's happening here. And we weren't even halfway through our plan for, practice. So yeah, some things run long, but we have to understand too, like we know what's coming ahead sometimes as the numbers trend. And those are the things that you're aware of. And if you didn't have those numbers going into it, I'll be honest with you, you would honestly ignore it. That data wouldn't be in your face.
And I think as time has gone on and we've been more acclimated to the data, the goal, I think, is obviously to continue to improve each year on the prescription of jumps. So not only being reactionary to the data, ideally, in a perfect system, vert becomes a checks and balances act of like, hey, our outsides are going to get 80 jumps, and then at the end of practice, you go, okay, like I'm within, plus or minus 5 jumps. And you're like, okay, great. We don't want to get to the point. All right, we're definitely past the point where halfway through practice and we're like, wow, we're jumping a lot more than I thought. You know what I'm saying? So working on that blueprint collectively between all 3 departments is, I think, what, again, is going to separate us from a lot of other people and not being reactionary, but, planning this blueprint out of what's going to be asked of them day in and day out. And that's where I think it's critical when everybody returns from all this. Like, if you don't have it planned out, then you're setting your athletes up, for failure. And when you have things planned out and like, what's your blueprint off of? Like for us, we have a great system. We have you guys and your numbers that you have from the league, and then you have it for our team. So we can compare and contrast and plan our blueprint accordingly. Whereas others, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, a lot of it is, what did you plan to do? And then essentially using numbers to say, how close are we to meeting that plan?
Right. And I know there's people out there that don't have a plan. It's like, oh, we just happen that, they become reactionary. It's like, oh, wow, we jumped 200 times a day. Well, how do you not know that? Like that's, what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do this week? And I think, again, that's where our staff and communication and data has facilitated a conversation that leads us to a better planning and preparation, and periodization phase of our jumps, of our practices, of the models we want to use weekly.
And I know we've all, Ed, Megan, your athletic trainer, Jake, we've all talked about what we just had there on the screen was that, we're always also trying to assist with making that easier and easier and easier, right? Because Ed's doing a million things. Jake, you've got a million things on your plate. So we launched that kind of jump prescription piece, Pat, like 3 days before everything shut down?
Yep.
Right? We'll call it a first world problem. It's only like a 2.5-year project, but it's okay. It'll be utilized, we think, quite thoroughly coming into the fall. But No, I think, I hope people will find this helpful. Really, really appreciate you guys coming on here. And again, like the community's been doing such a good job of sharing, as people, if anybody's watching this, coaches, heck, players, trainers, strength coaches, we're on our website, myvert.com. You can go in and you can schedule a time to speak with someone from our performance staff. Right now, that's most of what we're doing. Pat is living in data and just putting together reports that coaches are like, what about this? And it's like, well, let's put it together. And these reports we are sharing with everyone. This is not a only client thing. This is with anyone in volleyball. So yeah, please visit our website. We're happy to chat. And again, Jake and Ed, guys, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.